6 alleged members of a notorious Chicago street gang were indicted today.
As Andrea Medina reports, federal prosecutors say they're responsible for more than a dozen murders.
Today, the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Northern District of Illinois announced a federal grand jury handed down indictments against 6 alleged members of a Chicago street gang, charging them all with racketeering conspiracy. Federal prosecutors allege the group is responsible for at least 13 homicides and a wave of violent crimes carried out across Chicago, all in an effort to maintain control and protect their Southside turf. Those facing charges include 28-year-old Dante Harper, 31-year-old Tyrone Foy, 25-year-old Tywan Tapler, 22-year-old Robert Lee Thomas, 28-year-old Davion Harris, and 26-year-old Davian McClure. Harper, McClure, and Foy are also charged with murder and aid of racketeering. The indictment outlines several violent incidents allegedly carried out by the gang, incidents that were covered on WGN. The indictment alleges that on or about June 17, 2019, Thomas opened fire on a CTA bus, shooting at an intended target and other passengers, leaving that person and others wounded. The indictment goes on to say defendant Tapler was with Thomas at the time of the shooting. The indictment further states that on July 21, 2020, Harper and several co-conspirators allegedly opened gunfire at the funeral of Donald Weathersby, resulting in multiple people being injured. The indictment goes on to allege that gang leaders believe Weathersby was a member of a rival gang and targeted him in retaliation. Federal authorities claim that the members also used social media to promote their criminal activities, taunting rivals and boasting about murders and other violent acts. The street gang has been under federal investigation for years. Half of the defendants have already appeared for their arraignment, while the remaining ones are still waiting. Reporting outside the Dirksen Federal Building, Andrea Medina, WGN News.
Greetings and welcome back. It's your host, Gabe Morales. We've been covering the Illinois Department of Corrections. I have conducted quite a few successful gang training sessions in Chicago, bringing in many great local and out-of-the-area experts over the years. I absolutely love the city, its music and culture, and great food, and I hope to return one day soon. As discussed in part 1, Chicago has had gangs from the early days of the city. It was incorporated in 1837, and 50 years later, prostitution and gambling, often called policy, was in full swing. The city attracted a large number of European immigrants, as well as freed slaves from the South, who migrated north in search of work. Later on, many Latinos migrated to the city, also in search of work and a better life. Some of these individuals belonged to street gangs, who built stronger ties while locked up in jail and prison. And as they grew older, some became known as organized crime. As it was located on the Great Lakes, it was quickly dubbed the City of Broad Shoulders. But as the weather blew in off of Lake Michigan, it also gained another name, the Windy City. But in reality, many state this nickname was due to all the hot air from all the political windbags, aligned with Big Bill Thompson and Hinky Dink McKenna of the Democratic political machine that was very similar to Tammany Hall in New York City. Chicago always had competition with the Big Apple as far as culture and population, earning it the name of the Second City. As described in Chicago Gangs Beyond Folks and People, written by my friend, retired Chicago PD gang detective Joe Sparks and myself, I did a whole series on this channel about the 5 families in New York City and talked about some of the Chicago connections. For instance, Al Capone was a member of the 5 Points gang in NYC who moved to Chicago while he was in his 20s, becoming a bodyguard for Johnny Torrio, who in turn was the nephew, Torrio Moresco, wife and business partner of the godfather of Chicago, Big Jim Colosimo, who is considered to be the founder of the criminal enterprise known as The Outfit. Colosimo began having problems with rivals trying to shake him down, and Torrio bought in several guys for muscle, like Al Capone, to repel the extortionists. The ratification of the 18th Amendment to the Constitution in 1919 made production and sale of alcoholic beverages illegal in the United States, until 1933, when Prohibition was repealed. But Colosimo decided he didn't want to be involved in alcohol sales, so new outfit leader Torrio had him killed by a young killer named Frankie Yale on May 11, 1920, right in front of Colosimo's cafe, a notorious hangout for organized crime figures. Crimes like this led to the formation of the Chicago Crime Commission as a nonpartisan anti-crime organization founded by Chicago businessmen in 1919. In the 1920s, under its director, Henry Barrett Chamberlain, an attorney and former newspaper editor, the commission gained a prominent public advocacy role and became the nation's leading citizen crime commission at a time when there was a lot of public concern about organized crime and ineffective law enforcement. As the 1920s progressed, Torrio and Capone presided over the expansion of the outfit and they and the predominantly Irish Northside gang began a fragile alliance to take over Chicago rackets. The tension between O'Banion and the Jennas over territorial disputes mounted. The Jennas allies of the outfit wanted to kill O'Banion, but Torrio, not wanting all-out gang warfare, which would have probably attracted intense attention by the police, resisted that move. Finally, tensions boiled over when O'Banion cheated Torrio out of $500,000 in a brewing acquisition deal, which caused Torrio's arrest. Torrio then finally ordered O'Banion killed. November 10th, 1924, he was murdered in his Northside flower shop by Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Alsemi. In retaliation, the Northside gang made a January 24th, 1925 assassination attempt on Torrio, who then left Chicago, leaving Capone the sole heir to the throne. They fought over enormous profits, which resulted in numerous acts of violence, including the infamous 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, whereby Capone sent some of his crew, dressed in cops' uniforms, to gun down members of the Bugs Moran gang. Capone let the blacks' policy wheels to continue their gambling rackets just as long as they promised to only buy booze from him. You can get a hold of gangster tours in downtown Chicago and see some of the sites where some of these events occurred. And be sure to check out some of that awesome Chicago food. I like Portillo's for the pastrami sandwiches and Exchequer for their deep dish pizza. I know Chicago people probably know some better places, but I enjoy those two hangouts. Today, the Chicago metropolitan area boasts around 10 million people. And as of November 30th, 2025, the Illinois Department of Corrections held over 30,000 inmates in custody. And we will now talk about some of those individuals and some of the security threat groups they have been affiliated with during the rest of this video. White, black, and Latino gangs became more and more active after World War II and were often called jacket gangs, as they wore their colors openly on the back of their jackets, whether they rode motorcycles or roamed the streets. I'm really not going to get into outlaw motorcycle gangs here in this video, but I did a whole series on them on this channel if you do a quick search. My Outlaws MC video has almost 60,000 hits, and I may do more in the future on one percenters, as that seems to be a very hot topic for many viewers. By the 1960s through 70s, gang sweaters were also very popular among street gangsters. Many of the Chicago gangs formed alliances in prison during the 1970s, dividing themselves up into folk or people nations. For instance, in 1972, Larry Hoover went to prison and took control of the Supreme Gangsters, which were renamed the Black Gangster Disciples after Bledsoe's death. But Shorty Freeman took back control of the Black Disciples faction, and by the early 1980s, there were a few Black Gangster Disciples left. But both gangs kept the Star of David, pitchforks, symboling oppression, and a winged heart with two horns and a devil's tail. Gang members who were neither loyal to Hoover or Freeman formed yet another faction, the Black Gangsters, who renamed themselves the New Breeds, also known as the Triple L's, led by Booney Black. Hoover's organization would often vie for power and battle the Black P-Stones, who became part of the People's Nation. I just don't have enough time to get into all the major factions in this video, but if you're interested, all you have to do is search this channel, Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians, under Chicago Videos, or under a specific name of a group active there. I believe I have produced about 20 videos so far that you can check out. Out on the street, things were getting a lot worse in the hood, with the arrest of so many gang leaders during the 1980s through 90s of the crack cocaine epidemic. And there are some valid arguments that many of the younger generation were not schooled well on the do's and don'ts of gangbanging. As law enforcement cracked down on them more and more, gangs involved throughout the 80s and 90s and are still doing so today. One must understand that Chicago gangs are much more complex than just folks and people alliances. Per my brother and Cook County gang expert Franco Doma, who has appeared in Gangland as well as many other documentaries and news stories, plus serving on the Chicago Gang Commission, local money gangs, cliques, and hoods in Chicago today are formed into over 800 hybrid cliques. Throughout the Chicagoland area, they will identify themselves by smaller factions of those umbrella groups. Even though you're a gangster disciple, black disciple, traveling vice lord, etc., regardless of who you're affiliated with. Hispanic security threat groups are also often in conflict amongst each other, and also are broken down to main groups and subgroups. Latin Kings and other Latino gangs from the same area are just one example. One thing that has changed over the years is there are not as many white gang members as there used to be, or they have evolved and adapted, such as with the almighty Simon City Royals Nation. There are still some around, but with a lot more Latino members and even some black members. Royals still control some of their historic strongholds on the north side of Chicago and have spread out into the suburbs of the Windy City and even into other states such as Wisconsin, Mississippi, where they're real big, and there are also some in Alabama and North Carolina. They tried to gain a claim in Springfield, Illinois, when an individual named Sir Jokey of the Springfield chapter brutally murdered his stepfather, Ron Pops. According to local police, there was a heavy local recruitment effort put in place and their numbers began to rise. The Illinois Gang Task Force dubbed them the Springfield Mafia. Other cities in Illinois have also been affected by gangs. For instance, Al Capone moved much of his operations to the town of Cicero in the 1920s. As Chicago suburbs grew, so did gangs in many areas. Latin King gang members moved from Chicago into Aurora by at least the mid-1970s, as well as members of the Insane Deuces. By the 1990s, some Sureños had moved into parts of the state, in great part due to increased immigration of Mexican nationals, whose kids sometimes emulated the LA Sureño style. They sometimes aligned with folk gangs while in custody. There were also some Norteños who set up shop in Elgin, Illinois, who aligned with the People's Nation, specifically Latin Kings, as seen here. The gangster disciples are also still around and active all across the United States, including my hometown of Seattle, Washington, where they are one of the biggest gangs, also broken down into subsets. Meanwhile, in 2021, Larry Hoover, considered to be the number one for the GDs, hired Bill Cosby's former attorney, Jennifer Bonji, and tried to appeal his sentence under the First Step Act. But this was denied by a U.S. federal judge. May 28, 2025, however, Hoover's federal life sentences were commuted by President Donald J. Trump. Some argued that his release could be a good thing for reducing gang violence in the greater Chicago community and stated that he was a changed man. Others, knowing how smart he was and how well he could organize his followers, were still not convinced. There are some other individuals considered to be in leadership positions of some of the biggest, deadliest gangs in Chicago. For instance, Willie Minister Rico Johnson did time in the Tams Correctional Center. As mentioned in Part 1, that was the Supermax, where many gang leaders were held, in an effort to try to keep them from communicating with their underlings. But they were released back to the streets after completing prison terms for murder and other crimes. And they are now communicating with gang members again, but this time as professional interrupters for the anti-violence group Ceasefire, which paid them about $33,000 a year. Ceasefire has been celebrated internationally for its success in stopping violence, as widely seen in the documentary The Interrupters. But many cops still view it with skepticism, since some of the group's employees have been charged with some very serious crimes while still working there.
Moving on, community violence intervention that's been thought of as a tool to reduce crime. This is where folks work as violence interrupters, often ex-offenders in the street, and they go mediate conflicts. There have been documentaries made of it. It's largely gotten positive coverage, although the taxpayers have spent about $1 billion on it over the last several years, and that caused a journalist with the Free Press to come investigate. Her name is Olivia Reingold, and she is joining us right now. She's just out with her investigation on Chicago's violence intervention program. Hi, Olivia. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so tell us the impetus to go look into this broad umbrella of community violence intervention that has gotten lots of government support.
Right. Well, I'm sure some of your viewers will remember that in the fall, there was this viral moment where Governor Pritzker was pictured with what is called a peacekeeper. And then 6 days later, this man, Kellen McMiller, he was charged with murder for his alleged participation in a Louis Vuitton smash and grab. And so, you know, the local media, they definitely covered this incident. But as someone who spends a lot of time in Chicago but is not from there, I was thinking, what is this program and how common is this? How often are peacekeepers arrested? And so I've spent the past few months filing public records requests. And what I found is 28 other arrests of peacekeepers or men wearing peacekeeper uniforms. And so, yeah, we went to City Hall. We spoke to two aldermen, one of whom called this a scam. And basically, we're just trying to see, first of all, where is this money going? And then do people in the communities feel like their neighborhoods are safer because of these programs? And as you mentioned, you know, this is a huge sticker here. It's $1 billion. I went grant by grant to track that money. And I would say our reporting shows that at the very least, there's a debate over whether this is working.
Gang intervention has its benefits and its risks. I plan on revisiting some of the pros and cons of that with another expert panel in the near future. But one must understand that the highly organized groups of the past with recognized leaders, kings, princes, etc., with a vertical down structure like the mafia, is mostly a thing of the past. Today's Chicago street gangs are more horizontal and more fluid. They're also better armed and more out of control, often not answering to any single leader, or board, or mesa, or groups of leaders. This has been a nationwide street gang trend for many years now. Peer pressure in social media, diss videos, and net banging on computers, firing off inflammatory comments in songs or over the internet is probably the greatest motivation for violence today. Boys and men have been fighting each other since the beginning of time. Many feel a main key to a change in attitudes about settling differences by violence is to change the thought process by many males that beating somebody down or shooting them with a gun is the best way to resolve conflicts. In order to change, one must first recognize that there is a problem. In this case, acknowledge that there are things that led up to acts of violence before one can find a solution to stop it. This is a very common process with different variables for each individual and scenario. I just watched a video this morning where a guy had experienced extreme trauma as a child, was placed in a foster home for years, suffered abuse there, returned home with his parents as a teen, and saw his mom once again beat severely over and over by his dad. He ended up running away and got caught up in the meth life. He then heard about a guy who beat his best friend's sister really bad, which then set off almost this exact pathway of violence when he beat a guy to death and threw his body off a cliff. He went to the joint and became involved in prison gangs, experienced more violence there, and became validated as an associate. He then did many years locked up in violent penal institutions until he turned his life around. Like I said, these days in Chicago, most shootings aren't the result of a gang leader ordering his subordinates to kill somebody else. More often than not, they stem from very petty personal conflicts over perceived disrespect or over girlfriends or over unpaid debts, often related to drugs. Every once in a while, there's an old-style gangland shootings in Chicago that are ordered by shot callers. For instance, in April 2026, Four Corner Hustlers boss Labar Broman Span, who spent years as a powerful figure running his gang with fear, violence, and murders to control Westside narcotics markets, was sentenced to life in prison for a RICO conviction involving 4 gangland murders, including the infamous killing of Latin Kings boss / Prince Rudy Cato Rangel Jr. Spawn had been indicted on sweeping charges alleging that he took over the reins of the West Side Four Corner Hustlers gang after he was shot and paralyzed in 1999 and used murder to elevate the gang's reputation for ruthlessness as well as for his own street cred. In addition to Rudy Rangel, who was killed outside of a Chicago barbershop on June 4, 2003, Broman was convicted for the deaths of Willie Woods on April 16, 2003, George King on April 8, 2003, and Maximilian McDaniel on July 25, the year 2000. In spite of the Spawn case and many others like them, there are some good things happening in the Windy City. There are also people like Angela Bianca, an anti-violence and youth advocate, public speaker, and award-winning author of In Deep, How I Survived Gangs, Heroin, and Prison to Become a Chicago Violence Interrupter. There's also Rosa Julia Garcia Rivera and Nilsa Ruiz of the Chicago Growth Mindset Program, who is a psychotherapist, consultant, and life coach. I also recently produced 2 videos and did interviews with Coach James of the Getting Out by Going In, or GOGI program, that is now in place in all major California prisons to assist offenders and former offenders to stay on the straight and narrow path to success. So check those out if you get a chance and help me support these individuals in their worthy efforts to reduce violence everywhere. For years, I learned a lot about Chicago gangs from people like former Chicago gang detective Rose Gordon and Tony Avendorf, who grew up with and dealt directly with several individuals mentioned in this video. Once again, I'd like to thank the Midwest Gang Investigators Association, currently led by President Bruce Malkin, retired Assistant Director and Criminal Investigator from DuPage County. Thank you guys for all your great work and training. I hope that you found this video to be interesting and useful. I hope that you are enjoying your summer, and I pray for and tip my hat to all the great dedicated people working daily to trying to make a difference in Chicago, and the state of Illinois, and elsewhere to help keep us safe. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.